As you just heard, the recording is in progress, so welcome. And we will do the share screen. And I will ask Cheryl, because I can see you. Is it okay? Good. Cheryl knows my question. Thank you. So welcome again to the second session. This one is going to focus on the soul and Kabbalah. Again, a very important element as we talk about particularly mystical insights into the journey of the soul and the nature of the afterlife. And once again, I want to mention that I am supported by the Jewish Federation of Ventura County, and my specific role is supported by the Affordable Living Choices Trust under the direction of Joel and Barbara Aronson. And as I always point out, if you go to my website, justlotker.com, if you click on classes, the first thing that comes up is a description of this class. And now not only do I have the slides and the article, but also a copy of the video of the first class. And I will have a copy of the video of this class sometime tonight or maybe tomorrow. And I know there are people who have said that they can't attend the classes and are watching on the videos, and I'm delighted that I can do it. So I want to begin by discussing the concept of the soul. So what is the soul? One can view it as an extension of God. It's the godlike element within us. If the Torah says we are created, God says, let us create humanity in our image. So then there must be a divine element to humanity and an animal, a non-divine element to humans. So the soul can be thought of as that divine element within us. So looking at the text, and I didn't repeat all the books, but there's a wonderful book by Ellie Spitz called Does the Soul Survive? So a lot of the quotes that I have here are from Ellie Spitz and also from Simcha Raphael. So Genesis 2:7, it says, God formed Adam out of the dust of the ground, and there's a pun in Hebrew, Adam being related to Adamah. It's like saying God formed the earthling out of the earth and breathed into his nostrils the breath, the neshama of life, and Adam became a living creature. In Hebrew, there are three terms for breath: nefesh, ruach, and neshama. These are used in the Jewish mystical tradition to describe the soul. So in a sense, Cheryl, this is a beginning of your answer of why did they decide there are three elements to the soul, and pretty soon you're going to see five elements to the soul from the text. There are three words for breath, and so the mystics are going to say those are three different aspects of the soul. They're used. The image of breath conveys the idea that the soul is intangible, animates life, links us to God, and of course is the thing that gives us life, is breathing into the Adam a breath, and he becomes a living soul. So the dimensions of the soul now are going to be described in the Zohar, and I am going to talk about what is the Zohar, but the Bible, the Torah, scholars would say reached its current form at least about 500 BCE. The Zohar is written at least 15 or 1700 years later. Well, I'm going to talk a lot about the Zohar. And as they point out here, again, Spitz is pointing out, although there are three dimensions to the soul, it is one unified soul. So going up in sort of spirituality, as we might describe it, at the nefesh is the most primary level of human existence, representing the realm of action and physical pleasures. At a higher level is the ruach, the realm of feelings, which enables personality and expressions of love. Animals have souls corresponding to these two levels. The neshama, according to the Zohar, is associated with uniquely human characteristics: analytical thought, the quest for meaning, and transcendence. This is the living soul, nishmat chaim, that God breathes into Adam in Genesis. Then, a few hundred years later, along comes Isaac Luria. I'm not going to talk a lot about Luria. Luria is a teacher living in Sfat in Israel, And he is called the Ari, which is an acronym for his name. I think it's Ashkenazi Rabbeinu Yitzchak. But also Ari means the lion. And he is a central figure in Kabbalah. I'm sort of toying with the idea of teaching my next class on Kabbalah, although I've taught it before, not to such a wide group. So he has a lot of influence on Kabbalah as it's understood today. So he identifies two more levels of the soul, Chaya and Yechida, linked together as a fourth dimension of creation and might be called spirit. So here are some texts which I find interesting. So the first one is Berachot. So this is from the Babylonian Talmud. As God fills the whole world, so also the soul fills the whole body. As God sees but cannot be seen, so also the soul sees but cannot be seen. As God nourishes the whole world, so also the soul nourishes the whole body. As God is pure, so also the soul is pure. As God dwells in the innermost part of the universe, so also the soul dwells in the innermost part of the body. The interesting point here, I want to highlight this phrase, as God is pure, so also the soul is pure. We have in the morning liturgy a prayer which says, Elohai Elohai neshama shenatati bi tahorahi. Elohai, my God, the soul you have given me is pure. And some scholars believe that this is a very subtle refutation of the concept of original sin. In Christian thought, our souls, our nature, is stained by the sin in the Garden of Eden. So that Christian thought, is early in the Common Era. I don't know exactly when it enters Christian thought. The Babylonian Talmud is being put together, is edited around the year 500. So it's following Christianity. The Jews are being harassed by Christianity at this time. So the rabbis think this entered the liturgy by making one of several statements where if you were a Christian worshiping with Jews, this would make you feel uncomfortable. This one I love. So this is Chaim Vital. Chaim Vital is one of Luria's students. Luria didn't write down anything, but his students wrote down his teachings. So I love this analogy. To blow glass requires the glass blower to inhale deeply to take a breath, and then exhale through the glass tube. As the breath moves through the glass, it expands and shapes it. When the work is completed, the breath rests on the glass. So in reverse order, the breath on the glass is the nefesh. So the breath that actually is expanding the hot glass is the lowest level of the soul, the realm of action, the nefesh, the most basic level of life force present in all living things. The ruach, which means wind, is the force that blows through the glass, giving it its shape. The neshama is the outward breath of the glass blower. So the glass blower blowing out, not the force itself, but the kind of in the glass blower's lungs, I would interpret it. The chaya is the inward breath of the glass blower. So when the glass blower takes the breath in, that corresponds to that level of soul. And this one I love. And the yechida is the soul of the glass blower. These dimensions of the soul are intertwined and continuous. This is Dov Ber, another a student now, but a student of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. When a man is born, he has only an animal soul, the nefesh. When he overcomes the evil urge, the physical compulsions, such as the craving for food or sex, that person is given a ruach. The entire world of angels is then in his domain. If the person is even more worthy and he learns to master his emotions, such as anger, he is given a neshama, corresponding to the divine throne. This means that his every intent and thought creates a throne for God. When a person of this level thinks about his love for God, he is placed in the universe of love. Such a person must never remove his thoughts from God for even an instant, for God himself rests on his thoughts. No pressure here. I'm going to look and see what's going on in chat. Is Yechida connected to Yehuda? No, it's different letters. So I don't think so. Yeah, Yehuda is a hey. I think Yechida is a chet, but that would be worth checking. So Rabbi Spitz compares, I think Yechida is connected with the word echad, meaning one. Rabbi Spitz compares the multiple levels of the soul to 4 levels of human pleasure. Physical pleasure, pursuit of comfort, security, sports, sex, music, all corresponds to nefesh. Emotional satisfaction, love of our children, spouse, best friends, and so on, ruach. Meaning, service to nation and community, bettering the lives of people around us. Charitable acts corresponds to neshama, and intuition, imagination, inspiration, eureka moments, intuition of oneness, peak moments, sunset, holding a newborn, holy moments, and so on, engage the chaya and yechida dimensions of the soul. Let's continue. An important, I would say, take that Judaism has on the soul, which I think is different than some other traditions, is that body and soul are intertwined. And there's definitely in Christian thought this idea that your soul or spirit is at a very high level and your body kind of forces you to go along with it. There's writings, I think, both in the New Testament and I think in Augustine, that talks about, you know, my spirit wants to do good things and worship God and serve God, but my body, my flesh won't let me go along with this. And I think this fits very much into the Greek idea, which of course is an important element in Christianity, of the body and spirit as being 2 very distinct realms. So just some text on this. Just as wine stains the flask and the flask influences the taste of the wine, so body and soul interpenetrate and yet are distinctive. Sadia Gaon, who was the leader of Judaism in Babylon, writes, the soul requires good acts of the body to perfect its peculiarly immaterial, celestial-like substance, even as the body needs the faculties of sensation and reason that the soul provides. Yeah, so here's a quote from the New Testament. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the spirit, and the spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. So different focus. So I want to give a brief introduction to Kabbalah, because it's so central to some of these ideas. The word Kabbalah means that is received. I often say, if you go to a hotel in Israel, behind the front desk where you check in, it says Kabbalah, and in English it'll say reception. In this case, it refers to the idea of a received tradition. The goal in Kabbalah is to get closer to and even cleave to God. One of the concepts you hear a lot about in Kabbalah is devekut, which comes from the same root word as the word for glue. It's the idea of connecting yourself to God. It is built on top of Judaism. It's not an alternative to Judaism, but a much deeper practice of Judaism, beginning with Orthodox observance. It's sort of, you're at a level where you're an Orthodox observant Jew, but you want to do more and you want to align yourself even more closely with God, and that is Kabbalah. I'll get to Richard's question in a second. Pop Kabbalah is pop spirituality. Madonna, tattoos, red string, and so on. And it no more makes you a Kabbalist than wearing a stethoscope makes you a doctor. Let me just see. Yeah, so before I get into Deuteronomy, Richard raises the question, I don't think the soul needs to be equated with our nature. Now, actually, Richard, I don't know what you mean by our nature. Are you talking?
Yeah, can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yes.
You know, you made that the point that when it was originally said, maybe it was against the concept of original sin and being our nature. I think it's quite possible that we have a soul. I don't think that necessitates that we have a basically good nature. I don't think humans do have basically a good nature. I don't think they're necessarily a bad nature, but you just have to look at the horrible things that have done in history to sort of understand that we're not basically good.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree.
So I think the soul could certainly exist without the idea of our natures having to be good.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. They're two separate concepts.
Okay.
But I would say in Judaism, there is the understanding that the soul is pure. That's part of the morning liturgy, rather than tainted with original sin. And that evil deeds are a result of people deciding to do evil deeds, rather than being stained with an evil nature from Eden. That was really the point that I was making. Robin. You're muted, Robin.
Thank you. My 18-year-old cat was very, very ill, and I did not want to have to make the decision to have him euthanized. And so I said to him, please do me a favor, like go on your own terms. And I came home a day or two later. He was laying on the floor. He wasn't moving. He was cold. He was stiff. I called his name. He lifted his head up barely and meowed at me. I picked him up. I held him in my arms and talked to him. He did not take in his last breath. He gave out his last breath. So that was his soul coming out of his little body, going back to cat God.
Yeah. So I would say Judaism, I have no idea what the truth is, but I would say Judaism recognizes an element of soul that is present in animals and higher elements of soul that are present in humans. So I would say it's consistent with what you said. I'm going to lower your hand. Okay, so I am going to go on. Oh, so someone asked, can Reform Jews practice Kabbalah? So one question was, do Orthodox Jews practice Kabbalah? And can Reform Jews practice Kabbalah? I would say some Orthodox Jews are into Kabbalah and some are not into Kabbalah. So it's, for example, an element of Kabbalah would be meditation. I say a very common element of Kabbalah. Not all Orthodox Jews practice meditation, and many Reform Jews do practice meditation. And I would say some, I would say there is a movement now generally towards spirituality in the world. Actually, we didn't really address that. I think I addressed this in a Kabbalah class. And one of the reasons for that, according to Rabbi Arthur Green, is pure science doesn't seem to be such a terrific path to necessarily improving all elements of our world. Certainly many elements of the world, but not all elements of the world. So, so Rabbi Green says one of the reasons that we've seen a resurgence in pursuit of spirituality in Kabbalah in recent decades is the desire for a different path. And so there, you may know there's a movement within Judaism called a Jewish renewal. And I often think of Jewish renewal as being reform with a heavily Kabbalistic influence. It's reform in that it's very equal men and women, and not, sort of hyper binding on issues of ritual laws, but it also is very into Kabbalistic practice. I will point out that in the Orthodox world, Hasidic Judaism is very Kabbalah intoxicated. And there's a group which was sort of against the Hasids, which were called the Mitnagdim, that were specifically opposed to that element. So I want to illustrate one of the ways that Kabbalah derives a very important Kabbalistic element. So we have the Shema. I think you all recognize this. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. So the question is, in this context, what does the word Echad mean? And or how would you translate this? And here is just all these translations are permitted by the text because Hebrew is wonderfully open-ended and ambiguous. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is now our God, Adonai will be one. Adonai is our God, Adonai alone, Adonai our God, Adonai is one, Adonai is our God, one indivisible Adonai, Adonai is a unique Adonai, Adonai our God is ultimate, Adonai our God is unity or everything. The Kabbalists focus, I would say, on this last definition of the word echad. Echad can mean unity. And so I love to point this out. In one of the books behind me is this book called Echad, Many Meanings of God is One. And there are 25 essays in here on the one word echad. And some will, be a very Kabbalistic approach and others less Kabbalistic. But I often point to this, if you can have an entire book on one word in the Torah, in principle, you could have an entire book on most of the other words as well. Okay, so before I ask you to point to God, I'm gonna, so someone asked, can one have an evil soul or evil intentions? So what I would say, Pixie, is at the lowest level of the soul, as was described to us, is sort of an animal nature. And I think that's what the tradition calls the Yetzer Hara. It's not necessarily evil, but it's sort of in pursuit of gratification and selfish aims. So I think what the mystics would say is that that part of the soul is the seat of the Yetzer Hara. And I'm not sure. Intentions mean intentions mean you have these desires to gratify yourself, and I would say everyone has those desires, and I think they're even necessary. And I would say Jewish tradition says they're necessary. The question is, do we have higher controls to channel that animal nature into higher ends? And Robin, you're asking what does ad mean?
You have the two letters that are like capital at the beginning.
Yeah. So this is.
So what do they mean together?
Yeah. So one of the things that people point out is the ayin is written large and the dalet is written large, and there's about 3 or 4 different explanations. But they spell the word aid, which means a witness, and in fact, adat Elohim is from this same root. It can also mean forever, ad olam, or until, or with. I mean, again, Hebrew is just so wonderful on stuff like this. Jason is pointing out Musar, and there's lots of information on Musar. Okay, so when I count to 3, I can see some of you. I want you to point to God. Don't think about it too much. Maybe I shouldn't have shown this to you. 1, 2, 3, point. Actually, you can't see each other so well. So without belaboring it, I want to point to 2 authentic Jewish understandings of where is God. So the first one is conventional and rational. And in this idea, God is somewhere out there, presumably up there, and we are somewhere down here, right? So when we say every blessing, we use the word atah. Blessed are you, Adonai. So if we're using the word atah, you, there must be a you to distinguish between you and me. So God and humanity are separate, and God's in heaven, and we're down here. Now maybe God permeates, but with separate entities. This is valid, reasonable, rational. The second image, which is the mystical and Kabbalistic understanding of God, is that God is echad, which is unity, the ultimate unity of the universe, which means God is everywhere and everything. So I have lots of dashes here, and there I am, but I'm also dashed. People have called me worse, that there really isn't a separation between us and God. In this image, everything is God. God is in complete. I have lots of problems with Kabbalah. I'm not going to get into it in this session. When we talk about Kabbalah, I can talk about it. I have lots of problems with Kabbalah. But in this understanding, the distinction between me and God, or you and God, or a cell phone and God, is like the distinction between a wave and the ocean. A wave looks like it has a separate character, but in fact, as we know, the wave is just simply part of the ocean. So in this image, everything is God, everything's under God's control, everything is going exactly the way God intends it to go. That's why I have a big problem with Kabbalah, which I won't belabor here. I mentioned the Zohar. The Zohar is the central text of Jewish mysticism. Here's a translation. So the Zohar isn't small. It's a work of pseudepigrapha, which is one of my favorite words, simply because it's so bizarre. Pseudepigrapha is sort of like the opposite of plagiarism. In plagiarism, you copy someone else's work and claim it as your own. In pseudepigrapha, you write something and claim someone else wrote it. Now, why would anybody do that? Because if I write a little pamphlet on the nature of God, who cares? If I claim to discover a pamphlet written by, I don't know, Maimonides or Rashi on the nature of God, that's a big deal. So we have a work that appears to be written by Shimon Bar Yochai, who is a 2nd century Tana, a rabbi of the Mishnah, and it's written in the Aramaic of the period. And if you ask a traditional Jew, a Kabbalist, a Chabad rabbi, they will absolutely say that the Zohar was written by Shimon Bar Yochai, but scholars know that it was actually written in the 13th century in Spain by Moshe de Leon, either separately or along with his school. And we see some interesting examples of medieval Spanish creeping into the text. So I don't think there's any controversy in the scholarly world. I think some of the more traditional Jews would say, yeah, it may have been written down by him, but he was channeling Shimon Bar Yochai. It is structured as a commentary on the Torah. Again, the fundamental understanding in Judaism is God's connection through us is revelation, is Torah. So if you want to get spiritual, if you want to have a better connection with God, the path to that is deeper and deeper and deeper study of sacred texts. So this is a mystical commentary on the Torah. In it, we read of a brilliant rabbi 2,000 years ago wandering the Galilee with his disciples. Does this sound familiar to anyone? And sound familiar, John Sachs? I can see you smiling and saying yes. Yeah, there was another rabbi wandering the Galilee with his disciples, namely Jesus. And in fact, the Zohar is written during a time of maximum Christian anti-Semitism and persecution in Spain. So this is sort of our side of the story, that our guy also wandered the Galilee having these great mystical insights. It's a structure to the study and practice of Kabbalah. It introduces the 10 Sefirot. I'll mention more, and it's very difficult. How difficult? So here's a commentary on the moment of creation. I'm just going to read it because it's fun. At the head of the potency of the king, he engraved engravings in luster on high. A spark of impenetrable darkness flashed within the concealed of the concealed from the head of infinity. A cluster of vapor forming in formlessness, thrust in a ring, not white, not black, not red, not green, no color at all. As a cord surveyed, it yielded radiant colors. Deep within the spark gushed a flow, splaying colors below, concealed within the concealed of the mystery of Ein Sof. It split and did not split its aura, was not known at all until under the impact of splitting, a single concealed supernal point shone. Beyond that point, nothing is known, so it is called Reshit, beginning, the first command of all. And in Danny Matt's text, this is accompanied by 3 pages of 13 lengthy footnotes. So this stuff is not easy, and remember, it's actually written in Aramaic without punctuation and without vocalization. It introduces the idea of the Sefirot. So again, this is very complicated, but I'll just point out, you see the Sefirot against a person here. So my understanding of this is that since the Torah says we are created in God's image, then there must be something divine or godlike about humanity, but it also says there must be something human-like about God. So by detailed digging into these texts, the author of the Zohar comes up with 10 natures of God, or 10 sfirot. Sfirah can mean counting. It can also mean emanations. It's sort of 10 ways we connect with God. When I do a class on Kabbalah, I'll talk a lot more about this. So with that introduction, I want to quote a little bit of Kabbalistic teaching, actually summarize Kabbalistic teaching of the journey of the soul after death. And this is, let's see if I can grab this. So much of this material is from Simcha Raphael's book, Jewish Views of the Afterlife, which is now in a second printing. And I mentioned this last time. It is a wonderful source if you're very interested in the subject. If you, and another great source, which I always recommend and I've been quoting from, is Eli Spitz's book, Does the Soul Survive? So the following is a synthesis of Kabbalistic understandings following the teachings of Simcha Raphael. So at death, the nefesh, which remember is the lowest level of the soul, the most animalistic element of the soul, suffers the experience of the dying process, of the grave and separation from the physical body. And according to this tradition, that process takes 7 days, and that's why we're connected to Shiva. So actually, that's even a better example of why we observe Shiva for 7 days. This is what the mystics are saying is the reason. And there's a life review. I think I have more to say about that a little bit later. Ruach, next level, experiences the cleansing of Gehenna, a time to experience and resolve unresolved emotion. My own comment on that is this is post-mortem psychotherapy. It takes up to a year, and the deceased is helped by the children's Kaddish, not generally by children's Kaddish, but by the offspring of the person who has died, and enters lower Gan Eden, a world of emotional bliss where the personality is completed. And as Cheryl pointed out, and I mentioned, I think last time, you get a break from Gehenna. It's a purgatory. It's a place where your sins are purged on Shabbat. The neshama, now getting to a higher level, takes another dip in the river of light. This theme of light and river of light is repeated over and over again in mystical teachings, and enters upper Gan Eden, the heavenly repose for the soul. The quality of your stay here depends on your focus in life. If your focus in life was on the physical, upper Gan Eden won't seem like much. If it was on the spiritual, you reap the spiritual reward and experience transcendent bliss. Yearly Kaddish at the time of Yartzeit is said to elevate the soul to higher spheres annually, and the sources speak of seeing God. And then Chaya, the highest level, returns to the storehouse of soul, this sometimes called the treasury of souls. If in the previous stage we see God, in this stage we are being with God in the Tzror Chachayim, the storehouse of soul, or the bundle of life. And the associated morning ritual here is Yizkor. Yechida is joined with God and then is placed in the womb, meaning rebirth. We're talking about reincarnation here. The soul in the womb is shown the entire world, Gan Eden, Gehenna, and where it will live and die, and some say the entire Torah. When the moment of birth arrives, the angel touches the baby just beneath the nose, and the soul forgets all it has learned. And that's why we have this little indentation between our nose. The rabbis believe that the dead can communicate with both the human and heavenly realms where they petition for mercy on behalf of the living, and they speak of the dead being on the other side of a curtain. And I think next time I'm going to talk about some stories of near-death experiences, and maybe, well, we talked about this, and maybe some of my own experiences and my family's experiences in communicating with the beyond. And I think we did this last week after we end our formal session today, and I stop recording. We'll stay online, and we can share some of your own stories, and many of you, several of you did that last week. So I mentioned Gehenna and some traditions of Gehenna. And remember, this is from the word Gei Ben Chinon. There's a valley in Jerusalem where, according to, I think, the Book of Kings, it's reported that there was a pagan cult who sacrificed children to the fire god Moloch. So that's the name of this valley, and that becomes our name for hell or purgatory. The punishment of the wicked in Gehenna is a maximum of 12 months, so that's Talmud. But some are sent eternally. Who are sent eternally? Heretics, one who commits adultery with a married woman, publicly shames a neighbor, or fastens an evil epithet upon his neighbor. So watch out who you call nasty names. This period is a time of purification and atonement, and then the soul enters Gan Eden. You can, to avoid Gehenna, the following are recommended: sharing food with the poor, tithing money to teachers and students, and being humble. And I mentioned you get Shabbat off. The punishment fits the crime. There's some texts which say that those who are vain about their hair hang by their hair. Those whose eyes led them to sin hang, I guess, by their eyes. I'm not sure physically how you do that. Perfumed, if you were, indulging in expensive perfume, you hang by your nose. Those who slandered hang by your tongue, and those who committed adultery by your sexual organs. So see if this gives you pause to think. And some traditions of heaven, Gan Eden. The word Gan Eden means the Garden of Eden. So that is an image for heaven. I'll look at some of the questions in a second. Gan Eden is a heavenly realm where the souls of the righteous reside. The term Gan Eden can be used both for existence after death and the time of the coming of the Messiah. This is also true of a phrase that you hear a lot called Olam Haba, which means the world to come. You see it used for two very different ideas. One is literally what happens to you after you die, and the second is what will happen to the universe in the end of time, meaning at the time of the arrival of the Messiah. And there are fantastic descriptions. We talked about some of these in the class on Jewish mythology, which, by the way, is also on my website, with gates of ruby, thousands of ministering and singing angels, white robes, crowns of gold, gems and pearls, rivers of milk, wine, balsam, and honey, the tree of life bearing 500,000 varieties of truth, and the sages expounding Torah. And as you heard before, the Kabbalists speak of both lower and upper Gan Eden, and even a higher point. Lower is the transit point, upper is reserved for the pious of a higher grade, and it contains yeshivot for Torah study. So maybe some of you who are in choirs, or if you're really tuned in to high holiday liturgy, right at Kol Nidre, before the cantor starts chanting Kol Nidre, they will say, B'yeshiva shel mala or b'yeshiva shel mata. And they talk about the yeshiva shel mala and mata are the yeshivas here on earth, and the yeshivas in heaven. And the tzorach hachayim, the source of life, the disembodied soul prepares for rebirth. That is reincarnation. So I will comment on one of the questions. Do some Jews believe in reincarnation? Yes, some Jews believe in reincarnation. Reincarnation is a central element of mystical teaching, of Kabbalistic teaching. How can our soul be learning in the womb when God breathes it into us in the first place? That's a very good question. God breathed life into Adam with the first breath, but the souls are in the womb. The souls are before the womb. The souls less are in a storehouse of souls, and then they go into the womb, into the fetus, and they're there. The person doesn't become a human life for purposes of deciding, what is punishment for capital punishment until the person is breathing. That's an issue of Jewish law. These are, I guess, mystical interpretations, but it's a very good question. What about murders, Hitler, Stalin, etc.? I have no idea what that question is about. Pixie, you want to let us know what that question is about? What about the murders?
Well, I was just asking, it says if you commit adultery or you have, all these other, what to me are minor crimes compared to murdering thousands and millions of people.
Yeah, so you'll have to ask a Kabbalist. I don't know. I just plain don't know. But my guess is these people committed other crimes as well. But that is a very good question. Who had to be reborn, the wicked, in order to get it right? That's a great question, Bryce. I would say this is a limitation on my knowledge. There is definitely a stream in Kabbalah that you keep coming back until you have perfected your soul. And then I get this sense that then your soul just stays in Yeshiva Shalmala and doesn't have to come back to earth to keep working on it. There's a thought, which I find horrible and reprehensible, that when someone dies very young, a teenager killed in a car accident, the mystics would say it was actually an act of mercy on God's part, because that soul came back to this world because it had a few things to clean up. It did clean up those few things. God mercifully took that life before the teenager could screw things up worse. I find that teaching reprehensible, but that's me. Why learn just to be made to forget? Yeah, it's just part of the mystical poetry of these texts. Why does Gan Eden have to be oriented up and Gehenna down there? The texts definitely speak of going down to Sheol, that not necessarily Gehenna. It's a very good question, but I would say generally God is understood as up there. For one reason, when we offer offerings and we turn them to smoke, the smoke rises. So, and I actually think that may be one of the reasons behind it. Can Jews be cremated? We're going to talk about Jewish funeral practices next time in detail. So Raphael summarizes these ideas, and one of the things I found helpful, and he's got a website which I recommend to you. It's called da'atinstitute.net. That's da'at, which means knowledge, institute.net. And he talks about these levels of the soul, 4 levels, associates them with the 4 letters of God's actual name, the process of afterlife going from this way up, and the 4 morning rituals, Shiva, Kaddish, Yartzeit, and Yizkor. So he's done a lot of work on this. So let's talk about reincarnation. Gilgul Neshamot, literally the turning of souls or rolling of souls. Strictly a Kabbalistic idea. There's no reference to it in biblical, Talmudic, or Midrashic literature. It allows one to bring about restitution for sins of prior lives and attain future perfection, kind of an idea that I was talking about. Reincarnation, broadly speaking in Kabbalah, is only into human bodies. I think this is a distinction between other groups, other religions that speak about reincarnation. There's a lot of discussion of reincarnation into animals or even inanimate object. Here it's a minority opinion in the world of Kabbalah. The custom of naming someone after a deceased relative is based on this idea that the deceased relatives, you're in effect welcoming their soul into a into a body. I don't know if I talked about my Sonia's experience on this subject, but I will again. As does the concept of the Dybbuk. There was a wonderfully scary movie years and years ago called the Dybbuk, which is a malevolent possession of an evil soul prior to its ascent for divine judgment. So this is a soul that hasn't been able to move on because of, in the case of this story, the soul's attachment to the love of his life. So he actually invades her body and sort of captures her and possesses her. And in Lurianic Kabbalah, there is discussions and stories of exorcism. And there is a wonderfully, I think, beautiful teaching that anyone who is Jewish or anyone who converts to Judaism, their soul was present at Sinai when the Jews voluntarily, or maybe not so voluntarily, depending on which midrash you pursue, entered into the covenant with God. Why am I bound into the covenant with God? That is the essence of being Jewish. The answer is, according to this teaching, my soul was actually there at Sinai when I said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. That is the end of the material I wanted to present tonight. So I will, I'm gonna, still recording, but I'm just moving the chat down where I can see it a little more easily. So I will ask if anybody wants to make comments and questions at this point. Robin, go ahead. Unmute. Yeah, thank you. You need to unmute, Robin.
Thank you. As an educator of young children, it has been my belief that the soul is returned to a child, often before it's even born. And that is where we get these incredibly gifted children who are, 3 years old, they're mathematical geniuses or musical geniuses because they've received the soul of someone who was that in a previous life.
I would say those that hold with these teachings would not disagree. I suspect there are other explanations for those things. And you often hear people talk of certain children as having old souls.
Yes, or young soul.
Yes. So
I have a young soul. You know me very well.
So I'm going to take a look at some of the questions. Who has to be reborn? The wicked in order to get it right. So it's not necessarily it's people who have sinned in prior incarnations. I think according to this idea of Gehenna, that doesn't necessarily make you wicked, but it does mean your soul has work to do. It sounds like Gan Eden, according to the rabbis, is only for the Jews. There is a lot of teaching, I think I talked about this last time, that the righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come. I would say the mystics are really focusing on Judaism. I don't know, I just plain don't know whether there is a lot of teaching in Jewish mysticism of the fate of non-Jews and the role of non-Jews.
I'd like to think that the righteous Gentiles of the Holocaust were of that caliber.
Yeah, clearly it's hard to imagine anybody of a higher caliber.
Right.
But in the Talmud, I think particularly in the Mishnah, and certainly I think this is quoted by Maimonides, says that the righteous of all nations have a share in the world to come. And what do you need to be considered righteous if you're not Jewish? The answer is following the laws, the 7 basic ethical laws called the 7 laws of the sons of Noah, because Noah is called righteous in his time. He is 10 generations before Abraham, so he wasn't Jewish. So the rabbis study the text carefully and try and figure out what was it about Noah that made him righteous. And they come up with obeying 7 commandments, and I can never rattle off all 7 at the top of my head, but basically it's prohibitions against murder, theft, public blasphemy, cruelty to animals, and one positive one, which is an affirmative commandment to set up courts of justice. So the teachings, the basic teaching in the Talmud is that a non-Jew who obeys those laws has a share in the world to come, which is why, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I often, somewhat jokingly say, conversion to Judaism is hazardous to your spiritual health, at least in the next world. Because according to Judaism, you will be judged by God on how well you obeyed 613 commandments in the Bible, in the Torah, and thousands more that the rabbis develop. On the other hand, if you don't become Jewish, you are only obligated to 7 commandments. Believe it or not, this has an actual legal import. This is really obscure. The question is, can someone be converted by an agent without them knowing it?
Oh.
Okay. In Jewish law allows for an agent if something happens that's indisputably good for you. So, Suzanne, if I hear you won the lottery, $100 million, and you happen to give me your ticket for safekeeping or something, I don't have to ask your permission to go and collect the money and turn it over to you, according to Jewish law. If it's good for you, I am inherently allowed to do it. And there is a controversy about whether an agent can serve to participate in someone's conversion without them knowing about it and accepting it, with the idea that it's not necessarily in their interest to be converted to Judaism. So that's a little obscure.
But you're not allowed to keep the money.
I'm not allowed to keep the money. Well, I didn't talk about the finder's fee, but that gets into the detail. Let's see. What was Howie's? No, I didn't say that Howie had an experience with a Dybbuk. Noah listened to God, built an ark, despite, yes, he did. Noah had laws. There, Cheryl posted them. Don't profane God's oneness in any way. Don't curse God. That's right. There are 2 things about blasphemy, I guess. Don't murder. Don't eat the limb of a living animal. Don't steal. Don't commit incest, adultery, rape, and homosexuality. And establish courts of justice. Law and justice. Every response we choose to make to even little daily interactions and occurrences are an opportunity to elevate one's soul. I would say that's true. I would also say in the mystical approach, the idea is also that I didn't talk about this, but you're repairing a little bit of the world. So again, the mystics, and again, this is another example of why I say the mystics are very much focused on Jews, because the teaching is every time a Jew fulfills a mitzvah, and that may be something as ennobling as feeding the hungry or giving blood, or it might be something that wouldn't be necessarily on your top 10 list, like putting on tefillin or lighting Shabbat candles, or kissing the mezuzah every time you go in and out of a door. The mystics believe every time a Jew does that, a little bit of the universe is healed. And it's very Jew-centric. It doesn't speak to non-Jews being given credit for this. And the only thing I can say is Kabbalah is very Jewish-centric. Bryce.
Yeah, so when you were talking about being converted or anything like that without your knowledge, the Mormons have a very, very large project that they go back and baptize in the name of various ancestors. They go deeply into records to try to determine everyone so they can baptize them because they never had an opportunity, so to speak.
Mormons practice posthumous baptism, and there was a lot of controversy about that when they were posthumously baptizing victims of the Holocaust. I hereby give my permission to any of my Mormon friends. You can posthumously baptize me till you're blue in the face. I don't care. That element of of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is one of the many things that I find difficult to deeply understand about their theology. But I hasten to add, I don't care, because the Mormons, in terms of making the world a better place, I would say, do a better job as a small group of people than any other small group of people I know. So it's a perfect example, which I think is very Jewish, which is to say, we don't care why you obey mitzvot. We don't care why you do good things for the world. We don't care what your underlying theology is. Just do it. And I would say that's an example. And why I judge religions and people and movements, not so much by what they say, but by what they actually do.
And so do the Seventh-day Adventists. They have hospitals all over the place.
Yes, yes.
And schools they build everywhere. Right. Yeah.
And my reaction is God bless them, and that's my professional opinion. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, so we will continue next week with the focus, where the focus will be on near-death experiences, communication between worlds, and also a deep dive into Jewish mourning practices and the connection between how we mourn and these teachings about Jewish perspectives on the afterlife. And I'm going to cut off the recording. Bye.